Critical Thinking Redefined, A Journey from Logic to Wisdom. Introduction, A Mind Awakening. Sarah Chen sat in her favorite corner of the bustling Seattle coffee shop, staring at her laptop screen. The rejection email from her boss regarding her latest project proposal stung more than she wanted to admit. While your idea shows promise, the email read, "We need to stick with our established approach." For the third time this year, her innovative suggestions had been dismissed. She couldn't help but wonder, was she really wrong? Or was everyone else just stuck in their ways? The thought gnawed at her as she sipped her now lukewarm Americano. The autumn rain tapped gently against the window, matching the rhythm of her restless fingers on the keyboard. Around her, the usual afternoon crowd bustled with their own concerns, their conversations creating a soft murmur that normally helped her think. But today, even the familiar comfort of her favorite cafe couldn't ease her frustration. A chance encounter would change everything. As she gathered her things to leave, an elderly gentleman at the next table spoke up. "Forgive me for overhearing your sigh," he said with a kind smile. "But it reminded me of myself many years ago." His eyes held a warmth that made Sarah pause, despite her initial inclination to politely excuse herself. Dr. James Miller, as he introduced himself, was a retired psychology professor who had spent decades studying how people think and make decisions. His silver hair and well-worn leather briefcase spoke of years of experience, but it was the intelligence and empathy in his expression that drew Sarah in. What began as a casual conversation would evolve into a mentorship that would transform Sarah's understanding of critical thinking and her approach to life's challenges. The problem, Dr. Miller explained, stirring his tea thoughtfully, isn't just about being right or wrong. It's about how we think about thinking itself. He shared how his own journey had begun similarly, with frustration at what seemed like others' inability to see better ways of doing things. But over time, he continued, "I learned that the real challenge wasn't in proving others wrong, but in understanding why we all think the way we do." Sarah found herself opening up about her struggles at work. She described her carefully researched proposals, her attempts to innovate, and the constant resistance she faced from colleagues who seemed content with the status quo. As she spoke, Dr. Miller listened intently, occasionally nodding or asking gentle questions that helped her see her situations from new angles. He said after she finished, "Many people believe that critical thinking is about logic and analysis. And it is. But it's also about understanding our own biases, managing our emotional responses, and learning to see the value in perspectives different from our own. It's a journey that never really ends, but one that becomes more rewarding with each step." Over the next few months, Dr. Miller would become Sarah's guide in this journey, sharing insights and techniques that would not only help her navigate workplace challenges, but transform her approach to life itself. Through their regular meetings and the practical exercises he suggested, Sarah began to develop a more nuanced understanding of how to think flexibly while maintaining her integrity and drive for improvement. This book follows Sarah's journey of discovery as she learns to question her own assumptions, navigate workplace challenges, and help others embrace more flexible thinking. Through her story and the wisdom shared by Dr. Miller, we'll explore practical techniques for developing critical thinking skills that work in real-world situations. Their conversations and Sarah's experiences offer insights into the challenges we all face when trying to think more clearly and communicate more effectively. The art of flexible thinking isn't just about changing your mind. It's about understanding when and why to change it and how to help others do the same. It's about finding the balance between confidence and humility, between standing firm and remaining open to new perspectives. Through Sarah's journey, we'll see how this delicate balance plays out in real situations, from workplace conflicts to personal relationships. As Sarah discovers, the greatest obstacle to clear thinking often isn't external resistance, but our own deeply held beliefs and mental habits. Her story illustrates how we can become more aware of these internal barriers and develop strategies to overcome them. Through her experiences, readers will learn practical approaches to questioning their assumptions while maintaining the confidence needed to act decisively. Throughout the book, we'll see how Sarah applies Dr. Miller's teachings to various challenges. We'll witness her struggles and successes as she learns to navigate disagreements more productively, help others see different perspectives without creating defensiveness, and apply critical thinking skills in daily life. Her journey shows that developing these skills is not just about intellectual understanding, but about practical application and continuous practice. Dr. Miller's guidance provides a framework for understanding how our thoughts and beliefs are shaped by our experiences and how we can become more conscious of these influences. Through his conversations with Sarah, we'll explore how emotional intelligence intersects with critical thinking and how we can use both to navigate complex situations more effectively. The book also addresses the common challenges people face when trying to develop more flexible thinking. Through Sarah's experiences, we'll see how to handle the fear of being wrong, the discomfort of changing long-held beliefs, and the difficulty of helping others embrace new perspectives. Her story demonstrates that these challenges are normal parts of the journey, not obstacles to it. As we follow Sarah's progress, we'll see how small changes in thinking can lead to significant improvements in both professional and personal life. Her story illustrates that developing critical thinking skills isn't just about becoming better at analysis and problem solving. It's about becoming more effective in our relationships, more resilient in facing challenges, and more capable of helping others grow. The chapters that follow will take us through various aspects of flexible thinking, from understanding our own thought patterns to helping others develop more nuanced perspectives. Each chapter builds on the previous ones, providing a comprehensive approach to developing critical thinking skills that work in real-world situations. Sarah's journey reminds us that developing better thinking skills is not a destination, but a continuous process of growth and learning. Through her story, we'll see that the reward isn't just in better decision-making or more effective communication. It's in the richer, more nuanced understanding of ourselves and others that comes from learning to think more flexibly. As we begin this journey together, remember that every step forward, no matter how small, is progress. Like Sarah, you may find that the path to clearer thinking has its challenges, but the rewards of developing these skills make the effort worthwhile. Let's begin exploring how we can all learn to think more clearly, communicate more effectively, and navigate life's challenges with greater wisdom and understanding. Chapter 1. The Foundations of Flexible Thinking. Sarah couldn't stop thinking about her conversation with Dr. Miller as she drove home that evening. The steady rhythm of windshield wipers pushing away Seattle's persistent rain matched the cadence of thoughts flowing through her mind. His words had stirred something in her, a recognition that perhaps her approach to workplace challenges needed more than just minor adjustments. The first step, he had told her, leaning forward in his chair at the cafe, is understanding that our thoughts are shaped by countless invisible influences. Our upbringing, culture, experiences, and even our current mood all color how we see the world. The steam from his tea had curled upward as he spoke, a visual reminder of how our thoughts often drift without our conscious awareness. Sarah reflected on her own background as she navigated through the city traffic. As the eldest daughter of immigrant parents who had sacrificed everything for her education, she had internalized a deep belief in hard work and persistence. While these values had served her well in many ways, she wondered if they sometimes made her too rigid, too unwilling to consider alternative approaches. The neon signs of downtown Seattle blurred through her rain-streaked windows, each one representing a different path she might have taken. Dr. Miller had introduced her to the concept of mental models during their conversation, the frameworks we use to understand and interpret the world. Think of them as the lenses through which you view reality, he explained, using his reading glasses as a prop. Everyone has them, but few people stop to examine what their lenses look like. He had removed his glasses, holding them up to the light. Just as these help me see clearly in one way, they might distort my vision in another. The next morning at work, Sarah began practicing the lens examination exercise Dr. Miller had suggested. During a particularly heated meeting about the company's marketing strategy, she caught herself making automatic judgments about her colleagues' ideas. Instead of immediately dismissing them, she paused and asked herself what assumptions she was making. The simple act of questioning her own thoughts created a subtle shift in the conversation's dynamics. Her colleague Tom had proposed sticking with their traditional marketing channels, a suggestion she would have typically opposed immediately. Instead, She found herself genuinely curious about his reasoning. "Could you tell me more about why you think that would work best?" she asked. The surprise on his face was evident. This wasn't the Sarah he was used to sparring with in meetings. As Tom explained his perspective, Sarah realized she had been missing crucial insights about their customer base's preferences. Her assumption that innovation was always better than tradition had blinded her to valid data supporting some of their existing practices. The meeting ended with a hybrid approach that combined elements of both their ideas, something that wouldn't have been possible if she'd maintained her usual stance. During their next coffee meeting, Dr. Miller introduced another crucial aspect of flexible thinking: emotional intelligence. The cafe was quieter this time, the morning rush having subsided, creating a perfect atmosphere for deeper discussion. "Our emotions aren't separate from our thinking. They're an integral part of it," he explained, drawing a simple diagram on a napkin showing how emotions and thoughts intertwine. "The trick is learning to use them as information rather than letting them drive our decisions." Sarah remembered times when frustration had led her to dismiss valid concerns from colleagues. She began practicing emotional awareness throughout her day, setting quiet moments to check in with herself and notice what she was feeling. During one particularly challenging project review, she caught herself becoming defensive about criticized aspects of her work. Instead of reacting immediately, she paused to acknowledge her emotional response. "I notice I'm feeling defensive," she told herself silently, "but maybe there's something valuable in this feedback." This simple acknowledgement created enough space for her to listen more openly to the criticism, ultimately leading to significant improvements in the project. Her team members noticed the change in her approach, and gradually, the atmosphere in their meetings began to shift from confrontational to collaborative. Dr. Miller emphasized that flexible thinking isn't about abandoning our convictions. It's about holding them more loosely. "Think of your beliefs as tools rather than treasures," he suggested during one of their talks, gesturing to his well-worn leather bag. "Like the tools I carry in here, each belief has its use, but not every tool is right for every situation. A good craftsperson knows when to use different tools for different situations." Sarah's first major test came during a company-wide initiative to update their project management system. Initially opposed to the change, she caught herself falling into rigid thinking. The old system was familiar, comfortable, and she had mastered its intricacies. The prospect of change stirred up feelings of anxiety and resistance. But remembering Dr. Miller's teachings, she decided to approach the situation differently. Instead of immediately arguing against the change, she began asking questions about the new system's benefits. She sought out colleagues who favored the change, genuinely trying to understand their perspective. When she found herself forming judgments, she would pause and ask, "What if I'm missing something here?" This openness led her to discover features in the new system that could actually improve their workflow in ways she hadn't considered. Her balanced approach caught the attention of senior management. Rather than being seen as an obstacle to change, she was invited to join the implementation committee, where she could help shape the transition in ways that addressed both innovation and practical concerns. This experience taught her that flexible thinking didn't mean giving up her critical perspective. It meant applying it more thoughtfully and inclusively. As Sarah progressed in her journey, she encountered what Dr. Miller called the consistency challenge. "We often resist changing our minds," he explained over their now regular Thursday afternoon meetings, "because we think it makes us look weak or inconsistent. But true strength lies in being able to grow and adapt." He introduced her to the concept of progressive conviction, holding beliefs strongly enough to act on them while remaining open to new evidence and perspectives. This approach helped Sarah navigate the delicate balance between standing for her ideas and remaining open to change. She began to see that changing her mind based on new information wasn't a sign of weakness, but of wisdom. Her colleagues started coming to her not just for her expertise, but for her ability to help them think through problems from multiple angles. One evening, as Seattle's early winter darkness settled around them, Dr. Miller asked Sarah what she had learned so far. She thought carefully before responding, watching the cafe lights reflect off the rain-slicked streets outside. "I've learned that thinking flexibly isn't about being unsure or wishy-washy," she said. "It's about being strong enough to hold space for uncertainty while still moving forward. It's about having the courage to question ourselves and the wisdom to know that growth often comes from changing our minds. Dr. Miller smiled, nodding approvingly. And that, he said, is just the beginning of the journey. Chapter 2. Overcoming the Illusion of Certainty. The morning sun cast long shadows across Sarah's desk as she reviewed her notes from recent meetings with Dr. Miller. Her office walls, once covered with achievement certificates and project timelines, now featured a single quote she had written in bold letters. Certainty is the enemy of growth. The words had come from her last conversation with Dr. Miller, and they had been haunting her thoughts ever since. Most people, Dr. Miller had told her, stirring his Earl Grey tea thoughtfully, aren't held back by their lack of knowledge, but by their certainty about what they think they know. The statement had struck her deeply, especially as she reflected on her recent interactions with her colleague, Michael. Michael was brilliant at his job, with years of experience in software development. But his certainty about the right way to do things had created increasing tension within the team. Sarah recognized in him the same rigid thinking patterns she had been working to overcome in herself. The previous day's meeting had brought these issues to a head. "We've always done it this way," Michael had insisted, his voice carrying that familiar tone of absolute conviction. "Changing our development process now would be risky and unnecessary." Sarah felt the old frustration rising, but this time, something was different. Instead of engaging in their usual debate, she remembered Dr. Miller's teachings about the illusion of certainty. "Tell me more about your experiences with this process," she said, surprising both Michael and herself with the genuine curiosity in her voice. "What makes you so confident in it?" The simple question opened up a conversation unlike any they'd had before. Michael shared stories from his early career, including some painful lessons learned through trial and error. As she listened, Sarah began to understand that his certainty wasn't just stubbornness. It was a shield protecting him from reliving past failures. This realization shifted something in her perspective. The problem wasn't just about being right or wrong. It was about the human need for security and validation. During her next meeting with Dr. Miller, she shared this insight. The cafe was quieter than usual, the afternoon lull creating a perfect space for reflection. "Ah," he said, smiling warmly, "you've discovered one of the key paradoxes of critical thinking. The more certain we are, the less likely we are to learn anything new." He went on to explain how certainty often acts as a barrier to understanding. "Think of your mind like a parachute," he said, sketching on a napkin. "It only works when it's open. But opening our minds can feel scary. It makes us vulnerable to doubt, to being wrong, to having to change." Sarah thought about her own moments of absolute certainty, how they had often prevented her from seeing valuable alternatives. She remembered countless meetings where she had entered with her mind already made up, deaf to any perspective that didn't align with her preconceptions. "But how do we find a balance?" she asked. "We need some level of certainty to function, to make decisions, and move forward. We can't question everything all the time." Dr. Miller nodded approvingly at the question. "The goal isn't to eliminate certainty," he explained, "but to hold it more lightly. Think of it as having working hypotheses rather than fixed beliefs. Be confident enough to act, but humble enough to doubt." He shared a story from his own career as a professor, about a time when his certainty about a psychological theory had been completely upended by new research. "It was uncomfortable," he admitted, "having to revise everything I thought I knew. But it was also exciting, like discovering a whole new world of possibilities." Sarah began applying this approach in her daily work. When Michael raised objections to her proposals, instead of defending her position, she started asking questions. "What concerns you most about this change? What would make you feel more confident about trying something new? What could we learn by experimenting?" The shift in her approach had unexpected effects. Team members who had been quiet in meetings began speaking up more, sharing perspectives they might have previously kept to themselves. The atmosphere in their discussions changed from combative to collaborative. One particularly memorable moment came during a project review. Sarah had been certain that her approach to a client's problem was the best solution. But remembering Dr. Miller's teachings, she deliberately opened the floor to alternative viewpoints. A junior team member timidly suggested a completely different approach. one that Sarah would have dismissed outright just months ago. Instead of rejecting it, she asked the team to explore the idea further. To her surprise, this new approach eventually proved more effective than her original plan. The experience was both humbling and liberating. It showed her that letting go of certainty didn't mean losing authority. If anything, it enhanced her leadership by creating space for collective wisdom. Dr. Miller helped her understand the deeper implications of this experience. When we're certain, he explained during one of their talks, we stop asking questions. We stop being curious. We stop growing. But when we embrace uncertainty, we open ourselves to endless possibilities for learning and improvement. Sarah began to notice how certainty manifested in subtle ways. In the language people used, in their body language, in the way they responded to new ideas. She saw it in herself too, catching those moments when her mind would snap, shut around a conclusion before fully exploring alternatives. The real breakthrough came when she started helping others recognize and work with their own certainty. During a particularly tense meeting about quarterly goals, she noticed the familiar signs of entrenched positions forming. Instead of adding to the tension, she facilitated a discussion about what made everyone so certain of their views. What if we're all partly right and partly wrong? She suggested. What if we explore each perspective as a piece of a larger puzzle? The question created a subtle shift in the room's energy. People began speaking more tentatively, more thoughtfully, more openly. Dr. Miller had warned her that this journey wouldn't be easy. Certainty is comfortable, he'd said. Uncertainty requires courage. But it's in those uncertain spaces that real growth happens. Sarah was beginning to understand exactly what he meant. As she sat in her office that morning, watching the sunlight slowly fill the room, she reflected on how far she'd come. The certificates on her walls had once represented certainties, fixed achievements that defined her. Now she saw them differently, not as endpoints, but as markers along a continuing journey of discovery. Her phone buzzed with a message from Michael. Can we discuss that new development approach you mentioned? I've been thinking about it, and maybe there's something there worth exploring. Sarah smiled, recognizing in his message the first cracks in the armor of certainty. The journey of growth was contagious, and it was just beginning. Chapter 3. The Art of Changing Minds, starting with your own. The late afternoon sun filtered through the windows of Dr. Miller's home office, where Sarah found herself seated in a worn leather armchair that seemed to hold decades of conversations. This was different from their usual cafe meetings, and the change in setting felt significant. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, their spines telling stories of accumulated wisdom. You've made remarkable progress, Dr. Miller said, settling into his own chair with a cup of chamomile tea. But today, I want to discuss something that most people find particularly challenging. The art of changing minds, especially your own. He paused, letting the statement hang in the air. Sarah thought about the team meeting she'd led that morning. Despite her best efforts to facilitate an open discussion about their project timeline, she'd hit a wall of resistance. The frustration still lingered. I'm finding it easier to question my own assumptions, she admitted, but helping others see different perspectives feels almost impossible sometimes. Dr. Miller smiled knowingly. Before we talk about changing other people's minds, let's explore something deeper. Tell me about a time when you dramatically changed your own mind about something important. The question caught Sarah off guard. She sat quietly for a moment, running her fingers along the arm of the chair. Finally, she shared a story from her college years, when she'd been absolutely certain about her career path in medicine, following her parents' dreams. It had taken a transformative experience volunteering at a tech startup to realize her true passion lay elsewhere. That must have been difficult, Dr. Miller observed. What made it possible for you to make such a significant shift in your thinking? Sarah reflected carefully. I suppose it was seeing concrete evidence that contradicted my assumptions, and having space to explore alternatives without judgment. My mentor at the startup never pressured me. She just showed me possibilities I hadn't considered. Exactly, Dr. Miller said, leaning forward. You've just identified two crucial elements of mind changing: evidence and autonomy. People rarely change their minds under pressure. They change when they feel safe to explore new perspectives and when they see compelling evidence that challenges their current beliefs. He stood and walked to one of his bookshelves, pulling out a weathered journal. "Look at this," he said, opening to a page filled with his handwriting. "These are my thoughts from 20 years ago about behavioral psychology. Reading them now, I disagree with half of what I wrote. But at the time, I was absolutely certain about these ideas." Sarah peered at the passionate arguments on the page, now faded with time. "What changed your mind?" "Research, experience, and most importantly, a willingness to be wrong," he replied. "Every time I felt absolutely certain about something, I made it a practice to actively seek out opposing viewpoints. Not to argue against them, but to truly understand them." The conversation shifted to practical applications. Sarah shared her struggles with the current project at work, where team members were resistant to adopting new methodologies. She had evidence that the changes would improve their efficiency, but facts alone weren't convincing people. Dr. Miller said, "This is where many people go wrong. They think that if they just present enough logical arguments, others will change their minds. But human beings aren't purely rational creatures. We're emotional beings who rationalize our feelings." He went on to explain how emotions, identity, and social connections all play crucial roles in how we form and maintain our beliefs. When someone resists changing their mind, they're often protecting something deeper than just an idea. They're protecting their sense of self, their relationship with others, or their feeling of competence. Sarah thought about Michael again, seeing his resistance to new development processes in a different light. His expertise in the current system was part of his professional identity. Asking him to change wasn't just about processes. It was asking him to risk his status as the team's expert. Dr. Miller noticed her thoughtful expression. "What are you realizing?" "I've been going about this all wrong," Sarah said slowly. "I've been trying to change people's minds by showing them why they're wrong, instead of helping them feel secure enough to consider alternatives." "Now you're getting it," Dr. Miller smiled. "The key is creating conditions where people feel safe to change their minds. This starts with modeling the behavior yourself." Over the next hour, they explored practical strategies for creating these conditions. Dr. Miller emphasized the importance of psychological safety, creating an environment where people feel secure enough to question their own beliefs without fear of judgment or loss of status. The following week, Sarah approached her team meetings differently. Instead of presenting her ideas as solutions, she framed them as experiments they could explore together. She openly shared her own uncertainties and actively sought input from team members at all levels. The transformation wasn't immediate, but subtle shifts began to occur. During one memorable discussion, she noticed Michael becoming defensive about a proposed change. Instead of pushing harder, she paused and asked, "What would make you feel more comfortable about exploring this option?" The question changed the entire dynamic of the conversation. Michael opened up about his concerns, many of which were valid, and helped improve the proposal. More importantly, he felt heard and respected, which made him more willing to consider new approaches. Sarah also began practicing what Dr. Miller called visible learning, openly sharing her own process of changing her mind about things. During a team retrospective, she talked about how her view on remote work had evolved, describing the evidence and experiences that had shifted her perspective. "The most powerful way to help others change their minds," Dr. Miller had told her, "is to show them that it's safe and valuable to do so. When people see you growing and adapting without losing your strength or status, it gives them permission to do the same." As the weeks passed, Sarah noticed a subtle but significant change in her team's culture. People began prefacing their statements with phrases like, "I used to think, but now I wonder if," or "I might be wrong about this, but..." The rigid certainties that had once dominated their discussions were gradually replaced by more nuanced explorations of possibilities. The sun was setting as Sarah's session with Dr. Miller drew to a close. The room had grown darker, but the warm lamplight created an atmosphere of comfortable reflection. "Remember," he said as she prepared to leave, "changing minds, including our own, is not about winning arguments. It's about creating spaces where new understanding can grow." Sarah gathered her notes, feeling both challenged and inspired. As she drove home through the gathering dusk, She reflected on how her own mind had changed just in the course of one conversation. The real challenge ahead wasn't just applying these insights at work. It was bringing this approach to all areas of her life, including some difficult conversations she'd been avoiding with her family. But that, she realized, would be a journey for another day. Chapter 4. Navigating Emotional Waters, the Heart of Critical Thinking. Rain drummed steadily against the windows of Sarah's apartment as she stared at her phone, her finger hovering over her father's number. Their last conversation about her career choices had ended in frustrated silence, and she'd been avoiding his calls ever since. Dr. Miller's words from their latest session echoed in her mind. The hardest test of flexible thinking comes when our emotions are deeply involved. She had arrived at their meeting that morning already unsettled, the weight of family expectations pressing heavily on her shoulders. The familiar scent of coffee and warm pastries usually brought comfort, but today even the cafe's cozy atmosphere couldn't ease her tension. My father sent me another article about someone who left tech to pursue medicine, she told Dr. Miller, trying to keep her voice steady. He still can't accept that I chose a different path. I know I should be able to discuss this rationally with him, but every time we talk, I just freeze. Dr. Miller listened intently, his eyes kind but searching. You know, he said after a thoughtful pause, there's a common misconception that critical thinking means suppressing our emotions. Nothing could be further from the truth. Emotions are vital sources of information. They're not the enemy of clear thinking, but rather an essential part of it. He reached for his ever-present leather bag and pulled out a small, well-worn notebook. Look at this, he said, opening to a dog-eared page. Years ago, I worked with a brilliant surgeon who prided himself on being purely logical, completely unemotional in his decision-making. But his best medical judgments invariably came when he allowed himself to feel empathy for his patients. Sarah leaned forward, intrigued. But how do you balance emotions with rational thought? Especially when the emotions are so strong they seem to overwhelm everything else. Think of emotions like water, Dr. Miller suggested, gesturing to the rain outside. You can't stop the rain, but you can learn to navigate it. The key isn't to eliminate emotions from our thinking process, but to understand them and use them wisely. He went on to explain how emotions often carry crucial information about our values, needs, and unexamined assumptions. The anger she felt when talking with her father wasn't just about career choices. It reflected deeper issues about autonomy, respect, and the desire for parental approval. Your frustration is telling you something important, he said. Instead of trying to push it aside to think rationally, try exploring what it's trying to tell you. Sarah thought about this. I guess, when my father sends those articles, what really hurts is feeling like he doesn't trust my judgment. Like all my success in tech means nothing compared to the path he chose for me. Exactly, Dr. Miller nodded. And that insight helps us understand both your reaction and possibly your father's motivation. His actions might come from his own emotional needs, perhaps fear for your future or a desire to share something he values deeply. The conversation shifted to practical strategies for working with emotions in critical thinking. Dr. Miller explained how emotional awareness could enhance rather than hinder analytical abilities. When we acknowledge our emotions, he said, we can better understand their influence on our thinking and make more conscious choices about how to respond. Sarah began applying these insights at work. During a particularly challenging project review, she noticed herself becoming defensive about criticism. Instead of either suppressing the feeling or letting it drive her responses, she paused to examine it. I'm noticing I feel defensive, she acknowledged silently to herself. What's this feeling trying to tell me? The simple act of acknowledging her emotion created space for more nuanced thinking. She realized her defensiveness stemmed from insecurity about a specific aspect of the project, an area where she actually could use help from her colleagues. The real breakthrough came during a team conflict between two talented developers, Alex and Maria. Instead of immediately jumping in with solutions, Sarah asked them to explore the emotions underlying their technical disagreement. It turned out their clash over coding standards masked deeper concerns about recognition and respect within the team. By acknowledging and working with these emotional undercurrents, they not only resolved their immediate conflict, but strengthened their working relationship. The experience showed Sarah how emotional intelligence could enhance rather than compromise critical thinking. Dr. Miller had warned her that this integration of emotion and analysis wasn't always easy. We've been conditioned to see emotions as obstacles to clear thinking, he explained. Changing this view requires practice and patience. The challenge at home when Sarah finally decided to have that difficult conversation with her father. She prepared carefully, using the techniques Dr. Miller had taught her. When they met for dinner, she consciously worked to remain present with both her emotions and her analytical mind. "Dad," she began after their initial awkward greetings, "I know medicine is important to you, and I understand why you want that path for me. But I need you to understand something too." She paused, allowing herself to feel the full weight of emotion while staying connected to her clarity of thought. The conversation that followed wasn't easy, but it was different from their previous encounters. By acknowledging both the emotional and rational aspects of their disagreement, they found new ways to understand each other. Her father shared fears she hadn't known about. She expressed appreciation for his care while firmly maintaining her boundaries. Later that week, as she recounted the experience to Dr. Miller, Sarah realized how much her approach to critical thinking had evolved. "It's not just about logic anymore," she said. "It's about holding space for both thought and feeling, finding wisdom in their interaction." Dr. Miller smiled, clearly pleased. "Now you're discovering the true art of critical thinking," he said. "It's not about choosing between head and heart, but learning to listen to both." As their session ended, the rain outside had softened to a gentle drizzle. Sarah felt a new sense of possibility. She had always thought of critical thinking as a tool for solving external problems, but she was beginning to understand its power for internal transformation as well. The phone on her desk buzzed, a message from her father. "Proud of you," it read simply. "Let's talk again soon." Sarah smiled, recognizing that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in their relationship, one where both emotions and reason could find their place. Chapter 5. Breaking Through Mental Barriers, the Power of Perspective. A thin layer of morning fog hung over Seattle's skyline as Sarah made her way to an early meeting. Today was different. She had called this gathering herself, preparing to propose a complete overhaul of their development process. 6 months ago, such a bold move would have terrified her. Now, while butterflies still fluttered in her stomach, she felt a strange sense of calm beneath the nervousness. The previous evening, during what had become their regular Thursday sessions, Dr. Miller had helped her understand why this moment felt different. They had met at a small bookstore cafe this time, the towering shelves of books creating a cocoon of quiet wisdom around their usual corner table. "Tell me," he had said, stirring honey into his tea, "what's changed since you first started thinking about making this proposals?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "I used to obsess about all the ways it could go wrong," she replied. "Now I'm more curious about how it might evolve through collaboration. I'm not attached to having all the answers anymore." Dr. Miller nodded approvingly. "You've discovered one of the most powerful secrets of critical thinking, the ability to hold your ideas firmly enough to act on them, but loosely enough to let them evolve. It's what I call breaking through the certainty barrier." He reached for a blank piece of paper and began drawing a simple diagram. "Think of your mind like a house," he explained. "We all build mental walls for protection, barriers of certainty that help us feel safe and stable. But sometimes these walls become prisons, keeping out new ideas and possibilities." Sarah thought about the mental walls she had constructed over the years. Her belief that innovation always meant complete transformation. Her assumption that senior colleagues would resist any significant change. Her fear that showing uncertainty would undermine her credibility as a leader. "The trick," Dr. Miller continued, "isn't to tear down all your walls at once. It's about learning to create doors and windows, points of entry for new perspectives while maintaining your core structure." The metaphor resonated deeply with Sarah as she prepared for today's meeting. She had spent weeks gathering input from team members at all levels, incorporating their insights into her proposal. More importantly, she had learned to view resistance not as an enemy to be overcome, but as valuable feedback to be integrated. As her colleagues filed into the conference room, Sarah noticed Michael arriving early, a surprise given their history of disagreement. Even more surprising was his thoughtful expression as he settled into his seat, notebook ready. "Before I begin," Sarah started, "once everyone had arrived, I want to acknowledge that what I'm proposing represents significant change. I don't expect us to reach consensus today. Instead, I hope we can explore these ideas together, building on everyone's expertise to create something stronger than what any of us could develop alone." The shift in the room was palpable. Where previous meetings had often felt like battlegrounds, this one took on the atmosphere of a collaborative workshop. Even typically silent team members began offering suggestions and raising concerns. Sarah remembered Dr. Miller's words about the importance of holding space for different perspectives. When disagreements arose, she resisted the urge to defend her position immediately. Instead, she asked questions, sought clarification, and looked for the valuable insights hidden within opposing viewpoints. To everyone's surprise, including her own, Michael became one of the proposal's strongest supporters. "You've actually addressed concerns I hadn't even voiced yet," he said during a break. "And the way you're approaching this, it feels less like a forced change and more like a natural evolution." Later that week, as Sarah shared the meeting's success with Dr. Miller, she realized how far she'd come from the frustrated professional who had first sat down with him months ago. But something still nagged at her. "I feel like I'm making progress at work," she admitted, "but I'm struggling to apply these same principles in my personal life. Especially with my closest friends. It's like the stakes feel higher somehow." Dr. Miller leaned back in his chair, considering her words. "Often, our deepest mental barriers are built around our closest relationships. Tell me about a specific situation where you're finding it difficult." Sarah told him about her best friend Rachel's recent decision to leave a promising career to pursue her passion for artisanal baking. "I want to be supportive, but I keep finding myself trying to talk her out of it. I can't seem to stop focusing on all the risks and practical concerns." "Ah," Dr. Miller smiled. "Now we're touching on something important. What scares you about Rachel's decision?" The question caught Sarah off guard. As she sat with it, she began to recognize her own fears reflected in her reaction to Rachel's choice. Her worry wasn't just about her friend's financial security. It touched on deeper questions about the nature of success, fulfillment, and the courage to pursue one's dreams. Sometimes, Dr. Miller suggested gently, our strongest resistance to others' choices comes from the parts of ourselves we're not ready to face. Your journey in critical thinking isn't just about analyzing external situations. It's about understanding the hidden barriers within your own mind. This insight led to a profound shift in Sarah's relationship with Rachel. Instead of trying to protect her friend from potential failure, she began asking questions about her dreams, her fears, and her vision for the future. Their conversations became deeper, more honest, and ultimately more supportive. As the weeks passed, Sarah found herself breaking through more of her mental barriers, both at work and in her personal life. She learned to recognize when her resistance to an idea came from genuine concern versus unconscious fear. She practiced staying open to possibilities while maintaining healthy skepticism. One evening, as Seattle's early winter darkness settled around them, Dr. Miller asked Sarah what she considered her most significant breakthrough so far. "I used to think critical thinking was about finding the right answer," she replied, watching the cafe lights reflect off the rain-slicked streets. "Now I understand it's about creating space for better questions. It's about having the courage to challenge our own barriers while respecting the walls that still serve a purpose." Dr. Miller nodded, a familiar warmth in his eyes. "And that understanding," he said, "is itself a door opening to new possibilities." Chapter 6. The Ripple Effect. When critical thinking transforms relationships. The holiday season had descended upon Seattle, bringing with it not just twinkling lights and a blanket of snow, but also the annual company retreat. Sarah stood at the window of the mountain lodge, watching snowflakes dance in the crisp morning air. A year ago, she would have approached this two-day team-building event with trepidation. Now, she felt a quiet excitement about the possibilities it held. Interesting how our relationship with uncertainty changes, Dr. Miller had observed during their last meeting before the retreat. They had met at his home office this time, the warmth of the fireplace creating a perfect atmosphere for reflection. When we stop seeing it as a threat, it becomes an invitation for discovery. Sarah thought about how much had changed since she first started working with Dr. Miller. Her team's dynamic had shifted dramatically, and word had spread throughout the company. Other departments were beginning to seek her input on managing change and resolving conflicts. Even her relationship with her father had evolved into something deeper and more authentic. The retreat's first activity was a group problem-solving exercise. Teams were tasked with designing and building a bridge using only the materials provided. Sarah found herself partnered with Lisa from marketing and James from finance, two departments that traditionally struggled to work together. As they began planning, Sarah noticed the familiar signs of conflict emerging. Lisa focused on the bridge's aesthetic appeal and story, while James fixated on resource efficiency. In the past, such fundamental differences might have led to frustration and compromise. Instead, Sarah saw an opportunity to apply what she'd learned. "What if we look at this differently?" she suggested. "Instead of seeing aesthetic appeal and efficiency as competing goals, what if they're actually two parts of the same solution?" She encouraged them to share their underlying reasoning, not just their positions. The conversation that followed revealed surprising connections. James's concern for efficiency stemmed from his experience with failed projects where resources were wasted on superficial features. Lisa's emphasis on aesthetics came from seeing how user engagement dramatically improved when design was prioritized alongside functionality. Their bridge ended up winning not just for structural integrity, but for innovative design. More importantly, the experience created a new channel of communication between their departments. "How did you do that?" Lisa asked Sarah afterward. "I've never had such a productive conversation with finance before." During their next session, Sarah shared this success with Dr. Miller. The winter rain tapped gently against his office windows as she described how the retreat had transformed her understanding of critical thinking's ripple effects. "It's like dropping a stone in a pond," Dr. Miller said, sketching circles on his notepad. "When we change how we think and interact, it influences not just our immediate conversations, but all the relationships around us." He went on to explain how critical thinking, when practiced with emotional intelligence, creates what he called resonant relationships, connections that bring out the best in everyone involved. "You're not just solving problems anymore," he observed. "You're creating environments where better solutions can emerge naturally." This insight was tested sooner than Sarah expected. The following week, during a crucial client meeting, a major disagreement erupted between the development team and the client's representatives. The client wanted features that the team felt would compromise the system's integrity. Instead of falling into the usual pattern of defensive positioning, Sarah remembered Dr. Miller's teachings about resonant relationships. She guided both sides through a different kind of conversation, focusing first on understanding each other's underlying concerns rather than jumping to solutions. "What would success look like from your perspective?" she asked the client. "And what are your biggest fears about the current approach?" She posed similar questions to her team. As each side shared their deeper concerns, new possibilities emerged that neither had initially considered. The breakthrough came when they discovered that the client's requested features addressed problems that could be solved in completely different, more effective ways. By the end's meeting, they had developed a solution that actually exceeded both parties' original expectations. "You've changed," Michael told her afterward, as they walked back to the office through the light snow. "You've somehow figured out how to turn conflicts into opportunities for innovation." Sarah smiled, remembering her early struggles with Michael's resistance to change. "I've learned that every perspective, even ones that seem to oppose our own, contains valuable insights. The trick is creating space for those insights to surface." That evening, as she recounted the day's events to Dr. Miller, he helped her understand the broader implications of what she'd achieved. "You're not just practicing critical thinking yourself anymore," he said. "You're fostering it in others. That's when real transformation begins." The truth of his words became increasingly apparent as Sarah noticed subtle changes in how her colleagues approached challenges. Team meetings became more collaborative, with people building on each other's ideas rather than competing to be right. Even casual conversations seemed to carry more depth and meaning. One particularly memorable moment came during a weekend brunch with Rachel, who had now successfully launched her bakery. As they shared stories about their respective journeys, Sarah realized how much their friendship had deepened since she'd learned to embrace uncertainty and different perspectives. You know what's funny? Rachel said, buttering a freshly baked croissant. A year ago, when I first told you about my plans for the bakery, I was terrified you'd think I was being irresponsible. But the way you listened, asked questions, and supported me while still sharing your honest concerns, it actually helped me think through my decision more clearly. Sarah thought about how different that conversation might have gone if she hadn't begun her journey with Dr. Miller. She might have let her fears for her friend override her ability to truly listen and understand. Instead, their friendship had grown stronger through the challenge. As winter deepened, Sarah found herself increasingly aware of how critical thinking skills, when properly applied, could enhance rather than hinder emotional connections. She saw it in her improved relationship with her father, in the growing trust within her team, and in the deeper conversations she now had with friends. The ultimate goal of critical thinking, Dr. Miller had told her, isn't just to make better decisions. It's to create better relationships with ourselves, with others, and with the world around us. Looking out at the snow-covered city from her office window, Sarah realized she was finally understanding what he meant. The skills she'd been developing weren't just tools for problem-solving. They were keys to unlocking richer, more meaningful connections in every area of her life. Chapter 7. Teaching Others to Fish, the Challenge of Mentoring Critical Thinking. The conference room buzzed with nervous energy as Sarah faced 20 eager faces, all members of the company's new mentorship program. She had been asked to lead a workshop on critical thinking and problem-solving, an invitation that both honored and terrified her. Dr. Miller's voice echoed in her mind. Teaching others to think critically is perhaps the greatest test of our own understanding. The morning sun streamed through the windows, creating patterns on the whiteboard where she had written a single question. What does it mean to think clearly? The silence that followed was heavy with expectation. Before we dive in, Sarah began, I want to share a story about my own journey. She told them about her frustrations from a year ago, her chance meeting with Dr. Miller, and the transformative path that followed. As she spoke, she noticed the tension in the room beginning to ease. Shoulders relaxed, notebooks opened, and faces softened with recognition. The hardest lesson I learned, she continued, wasn't about mastering specific techniques. It was realizing that critical thinking isn't just about being smart or logical. It's about being willing to question our own certainties while remaining open to new understanding. A young developer named Maya raised her hand. But how do you do that without losing confidence in your decisions? I often find myself paralyzed by overthinking. The question resonated deeply with Sarah. Just the previous week, she had discussed this very challenge with Dr. Miller during one of their now monthly meetings. They had moved their sessions to a small garden cafe, where the presence of growing things seemed to mirror their evolving conversations. The paradox of teaching critical thinking, Dr. Miller had explained, is that we must help others develop both strength and flexibility, the confidence to act decisively and the humility to remain open to new information. Drawing on this wisdom, Sarah addressed Maya's concern. Think of it like martial arts, she suggested. A skilled practitioner is both grounded and adaptable. They have a strong stance, but they're ready to move when needed. Critical thinking works the same way. She went on to guide the group through exercises she had developed, combining Dr. Miller's teachings with her own experiences. They practiced identifying assumptions, exploring different perspectives, and recognizing emotional triggers that could cloud judgment. During a role-playing exercise, where participants had to navigate a complex workplace scenario, Sarah noticed something fascinating. Those who struggled most were often the ones with the most expertise in their fields. Their very knowledge sometimes became a barrier to considering alternative viewpoints. This is what I call the expert's paradox, she explained. The more we know about something, the harder it can be to remain open to new approaches. But true expertise includes the wisdom to recognize its own limitations. The workshop's turning point came during the afternoon session, when a heated debate erupted between two participants over the best approach to project management. Instead of intervening immediately, Sarah saw an opportunity for a live demonstration of critical thinking principles. Let's pause for a moment, she suggested. Rather than arguing for your positions, Can each of you try to articulate the other person's perspective? Not to refute it, but to understand it so well they would agree with your description. The exercise transformed the debate into a dialogue. As participants practiced seeing through each other's eyes, new insights emerged that enriched everyone's understanding. The room came alive with energy as people began applying this approach to their own workplace challenges. Later that evening, sharing the day's events with Dr. Miller, Sarah expressed her surprise at how teaching others had deepened her own understanding. It's like each question they asked forced me to examine my assumptions more carefully, she reflected. Dr. Miller smiled, his eyes twinkling. Teaching is one of the most powerful forms of learning, he said. When we help others develop their critical thinking skills, we inevitably strengthen our own. But there's something else happening here, too. He paused, choosing his words carefully. You're not just teaching techniques, you're modeling a way of being. Your willingness to share your own journey, including your struggles and uncertainties, creates space for others to embrace their own growth. This insight proved valuable in the weeks that followed, as Sarah began one-on-one mentoring sessions with several workshop participants. Each brought unique challenges that tested and expanded her understanding of critical thinking. There was Thomas, a brilliant analyst whose fear of making mistakes often led to analysis paralysis. Working with him, Sarah developed new ways to frame uncertainty as a tool for exploration rather than a barrier to action. They practiced what she called confident curiosity, the ability to move forward while remaining open to new information. Then there was Jennifer, a senior manager struggling to bridge generational gaps in her team. Together, they explored how different life experiences shaped people's perspectives and problem-solving approaches. Sarah helped her develop strategies for turning these differences into strengths rather than sources of conflict. Perhaps the most challenging was David, whose strong opinions and quick mind often created tension with colleagues. Sarah recognized in him elements of her former self, the certainty that often masked a deeper insecurity about being wrong. The hardest person to lead is ourselves, she told him during one particularly difficult session. But every time we choose curiosity over certainty, we create possibilities for growth. As winter turned to spring, Sarah noticed profound changes in those she mentored. But more surprisingly, she found herself growing in unexpected ways through the process of teaching others. Each challenge her mentor faced became an opportunity for her to deepen her own understanding. During her next meeting with Dr. Miller, as they watched cherry blossoms drift past the cafe window, she shared this realization. It's like each person I work with adds a new dimension to my understanding of critical thinking, she said. Their questions and struggles help me see things I might have missed. Dr. Miller nodded approvingly. That's the beautiful thing about teaching others to think critically, he replied. It's not about having all the answers. It's about creating spaces where better questions can emerge. Sarah thought about how far she had come from that frustrated professional who had first met Dr. Miller in a coffee shop. Now, she was helping others navigate their own journeys toward clearer thinking and better understanding. Remember, Dr. Miller added, seeing her reflection, teaching others to think critically isn't just about sharing knowledge. It's about nurturing wisdom in them and in ourselves. Chapter 8. When Worlds Collide, Bridging Personal and Professional Growth. A spring storm rattled the windows of Sarah's apartment as she stared at an email that would test everything she had learned about critical thinking. Her company was merging with a larger tech firm, and she had been chosen to lead the integration of their development teams. The challenge wasn't just technical. It was deeply personal, affecting people she had worked with for years. Change is easy to discuss in theory, Dr. Miller had once told her, but when it affects real people's lives, that's when our critical thinking skills face their true test. She thought about this as she prepared for her morning meeting with both teams. The merger announcement had created waves of anxiety throughout the office. Rumors circulated about layoffs, and long-standing colleagues were already taking sides. Even Michael, who had become one of her strongest allies, seemed distant and worried. The previous evening, during their regular session, Dr. Miller had helped her frame the challenge. They sat in his garden this time, the spring flowers providing a stark contrast to the tension she felt inside. You're facing what I call a crucible moment, he explained, carefully pruning a rose bush as he spoke. It's when our personal values, professional responsibilities, and critical thinking skills must all align under pressure. How we handle these moments often defines our growth. Sarah watched him tend to the roses, noting how he carefully balanced cutting away dead growth while preserving the plant's core strength. The metaphor wasn't lost on her. The key, he continued, is to remember that critical thinking isn't just about solving problems. It's about holding space for transformation. Sometimes, what looks like resistance is actually growing pains. As she faced the combined teams that morning, Sarah drew upon everything she had learned. The conference room was packed, with some team members joining virtually. She could feel the tension, see the crossed arms and worried faces. Instead of starting with the merger plans, she did something unexpected. Before we discuss any changes, she began, I want to acknowledge what this means for each of us personally. This isn't just about combining code bases or aligning methodologies. It's about bringing together two groups of talented people who care deeply about their work. The shift in the room was subtle but noticeable. Shoulders relaxed slightly, and a few people uncrossed their arms. She continued, I'd like us to start by sharing our hopes and fears about this merger. Not just the professional ones, but the personal ones too. What followed was unlike any meeting they'd had before. People spoke about their fears of becoming redundant, their worries about changing team dynamics, and their hopes for new opportunities. Sarah used the listening skills Dr. Miller had taught her, helping each person feel truly heard while guiding the conversation toward constructive possibilities. When Michael finally spoke, his words captured what many were feeling. It's not just about our jobs, he said quietly. It's about the culture we've built here, the relationships we've developed. We don't want to lose that. Sarah recognized the deeper truth in his words. The challenge wasn't just managing change. It was preserving what mattered most while evolving together. She shared this insight during her next session with Dr. Miller. He smiled. Now you're seeing the heart of critical thinking in action. It's not about choosing between preservation and progress. It's about finding ways to honor both. Over the next few weeks, Sarah worked to apply this understanding. She created mixed teams for initial projects, carefully pairing people whose strengths complemented each other. She established regular forums where concerns could be aired and addressed openly. Most importantly, she maintained transparent communication about both successes and challenges. The process wasn't smooth. There were heated debates about coding standards, project management approaches, and team structure. But Sarah had learned to see conflict as an opportunity for deeper understanding. When tensions rose, she would guide people back to their shared values and goals while acknowledging their individual concerns. One particularly challenging moment came when they had to decide which development methodology to adopt. The acquiring company preferred their established approach, while Sarah's team had developed their own effective system. Instead of forcing a decision, she facilitated a series of workshops where both teams could explore and understand each other's methods. What if, she suggested, instead of choosing between approaches, we create something new that captures the best of both? The process of combining methodologies became a metaphor for the merger itself, finding ways to blend different strengths into something stronger. The breakthrough came unexpectedly during a late-night coding session. A developer from each team, working together to solve a particularly thorny problem, discovered that their different approaches actually complemented each other perfectly. Their excitement was contagious, and soon others began finding similar synergies. Sarah shared this victory with Dr. Miller during their next meeting. The garden was in full bloom now, much like the transformation she was witnessing at work. You've learned something profound, he observed. Critical thinking isn't just an individual skill, it's a catalyst for collective growth. When we create environments where people feel safe to question, explore, and evolve together, remarkable things happen. This understanding deepened as Sarah faced personal challenges alongside the professional ones. Her father's health had begun to decline, forcing her to balance work responsibilities with family care. The skills she had developed helped her navigate these complex waters with greater grace and wisdom. During team meetings, she began sharing more openly about her personal challenges, modeling how to maintain professional effectiveness while honoring personal realities. This openness created space for others to do the same, fostering a more human-centered approach to their work together. The real art of critical thinking, Dr. Miller had told her, is learning to weave together the analytical and the emotional, the professional and the personal. It's about seeing the whole picture while attending to the details. As spring turned to summer, the merged teams began to find their rhythm. What had started as two separate groups was evolving into something new, not through forced integration, but through shared growth and understanding. One evening, as Sarah walked through the office, she overheard a conversation between team members from both companies. They were excitedly discussing ideas for a new project, building on each other's suggestions without any trace of their former division. In that moment, she understood what Dr. Miller had meant about transformation. The storm outside had passed, leaving the air fresh and clear. Sarah looked out at the city lights, reflecting on how far they had all come. The merger had been more than a professional challenge. It had been an opportunity for everyone to grow, to question their assumptions, and to create something greater than they could have imagined separately. Chapter 9. The Synthesis. When Theory Meets Life. The late summer sun cast long shadows across Dr. Miller's garden as Sarah arrived for what would be one of their most important sessions. She had just been offered a position as Chief Innovation Officer at her company, a role that would test everything she had learned about critical thinking in new and challenging ways. "I should be excited," she told Dr. Miller, settling into one of the weathered Adirondack chairs that dotted his garden. "But instead, I find myself questioning whether I'm ready for this level of responsibility. It's not just about making decisions anymore. It's about shaping the future of the entire organization." Dr. Miller listened thoughtfully, pruning shears paused mid-task. "Tell me," he said, "how has your understanding of critical thinking evolved since we first met?" The question made Sarah pause. Around them, the garden hummed with late summer life, bees visiting the last flowers, birds calling from nearby trees. The natural rhythm seemed to mirror her own journey of growth and transformation. "I used to think critical thinking was about being right," she began slowly. "Now I understand it's about being wise. It's about holding multiple truths simultaneously while remaining open to new understanding." She thought about the merged team she now led, how their initial conflicts had transformed into creative synergy. She remembered difficult conversations with her father about his healthcare, where her improved ability to balance emotion and analysis had led to better decisions for everyone. "But this new role," she continued, "it feels different. The stakes are higher. My decisions will affect hundreds of people's lives." Dr. Miller set down his pruning shears and settled into the chair beside her. "Perhaps," he suggested, "this is the perfect opportunity to synthesize everything you've learned. Tell me about a specific challenge you're anticipating in this new role." Sarah described the company's need to pivot toward artificial intelligence and machine learning technologies. "We need to innovate to stay competitive," she explained, "but I'm concerned about the impact on our workforce. Many of our most experienced team members will need to completely reinvent their skills." "Ah," Dr. Miller smiled. "Now this is where true critical thinking shines. How might you approach this challenge using everything you've learned?" Sarah thought carefully, watching a butterfly navigate between flowers. "Well, first, I need to acknowledge that this isn't just a technical challenge. It's a human one. We're not just changing technologies. We're asking people to transform their professional identities." She continued thinking aloud, drawing connections between different aspects of her learning. "I would start by creating spaces for honest dialogue about fears and aspirations. We need to understand the emotional landscape before we can navigate the technical one." Dr. Miller nodded encouragingly. "Go on. We could create learning partnerships, pairing experienced developers with those who have AI expertise. This isn't just about training. It's about preserving the wisdom our senior team members have while helping them evolve their skills." As she spoke, Sarah felt pieces clicking into place. Her experience with the merger had taught her how to blend different strengths into something new. Her mentoring work had shown her how to guide others through transformation while honoring their existing knowledge. The key, she realized, is to make everyone part of the innovation process. Instead of imposing change from above, we can co-create the future together. Dr. Miller beamed. "Now you're seeing the full picture. Critical thinking at its highest level isn't just about analysis. It's about synthesis. It's about weaving together different threads of understanding to create something new. Their conversation shifted to the broader implications of her role. As Chief Innovation Officer, she wouldn't just be solving technical problems. She'd be helping shape the company's culture and values. Remember, Dr. Miller advised, innovation isn't just about new technologies. It's about creating environments where people feel safe to question, explore, and grow together. The following weeks tested this understanding in unexpected ways. Sarah's first major initiative was to establish what she called innovation circles, cross-functional groups where employees at all levels could explore new ideas and concerns about the company's direction. During one particularly memorable session, a veteran developer named Frank voiced what many were thinking. "I've spent 20 years mastering my craft," he said, voice tight with emotion. "Now it feels like all that expertise is becoming obsolete." Instead of rushing to reassure him, Sarah drew upon her critical thinking skills to guide a deeper exploration. "Tell us more about your expertise," she encouraged. "What fundamental insights have you gained that might apply to these new technologies?" As Frank spoke about his experiences solving complex problems and mentoring younger developers, others began to see connections between his wisdom and the challenges of AI development. The conversation shifted from fear of obsolescence to excitement about how different forms of knowledge could complement each other. Sarah brought these insights to her next session with Dr. Miller. The garden was showing signs of early autumn now, with some leaves beginning to turn golden. "It's remarkable," she said, "how often the solution to a problem lies in reframing how we think about it." "Yes," Dr. Miller agreed, "and that's the heart of what you've learned. Critical thinking isn't just a set of tools. It's a way of being in the world. It's about staying open to possibility while remaining grounded in wisdom." They discussed how her approach to leadership had evolved. She was no longer just solving problems. She was creating conditions where better solutions could emerge naturally. Her understanding of critical thinking had expanded to include emotional intelligence, cultural awareness, and the ability to facilitate collective growth. "The greatest challenge for a leader," Dr. Miller observed, "is to help others develop their own critical thinking skills while navigating complex change. You're not just making decisions anymore. You're shaping how people think about thinking itself." This insight proved invaluable as Sarah faced increasingly complex challenges in her new role. When conflicts arose between different departments about resource allocation for AI initiatives, she helped them move beyond positional bargaining to explore underlying needs and opportunities. She established regular wisdom-sharing sessions where experienced team members could articulate their implicit knowledge, making it easier to identify how their expertise could enhance new technological approaches. The results surprised everyone. Innovations emerged that combined deep domain experience with cutting-edge technology in unexpected ways. As autumn deepened, Sarah realized that her journey with critical thinking had come full circle. She was now helping others develop the same skills that had transformed her own life and career. But this wasn't an ending. It was a new beginning, with each day bringing fresh challenges and opportunities for growth. "You know," Dr. Miller said during one of their last sessions of the year, "the true measure of mastery isn't in knowing all the answers. It's in knowing how to ask better questions and create spaces where wisdom can emerge." Sarah looked around his garden, now preparing for winter rest, and understood that, like nature itself, growth and transformation were endless cycles. Critical thinking wasn't a destination, but a journey, one that continued to unfold in ever more complex and beautiful ways. Chapter 10. The Heart of Wisdom, When Personal and Professional Lives Converge. The first snowfall of winter dusted Seattle's streets as Sarah sat in her father's hospital room, laptop balanced precariously on her knees. As Chief Innovation Officer, she was leading her company through a critical phase of AI integration. As a daughter, she was helping navigate her father's complex medical decisions. These two worlds, once seemingly separate, were now intersecting in ways that challenged everything she knew about critical thinking. Life has a way of testing our principles most thoroughly when different aspects of our lives collide, Dr. Miller had told her during their last meeting. They had moved their sessions indoors for the winter, the warmth of his study providing a cozy haven for their increasingly deep discussions. Her father stirred in his hospital bed, and Sarah set aside her laptop. The doctors had presented them with several treatment options, each with its own set of risks and potential benefits. The analytical part of her mind wanted to create a decision matrix, weighing probabilities and outcomes. But her heart ached with the weight of the choice. How do you balance logic and love when making life-altering decisions? She had asked Dr. Miller earlier that week. He had smiled gently, reaching for an old leather-bound book on his shelf. Perhaps, he suggested, they're not as separate as we think. The highest form of critical thinking integrates both our rational analysis and our emotional wisdom. Sarah reflected on this as she held her father's hand. She remembered how, just last month, she had helped her team navigate a difficult decision about implementing AI in their customer service department. The analytical data strongly supported automation, but she had insisted on deeper exploration of the human implications. "Tell me about your concerns," she had asked her customer service team, using the listening skills she developed over the past year. Their insights revealed nuances that pure data analysis had missed: the subtle ways human empathy affected customer loyalty, the importance of personal connection in building trust. The solution they ultimately developed combined AI efficiency with human wisdom in ways none of them had initially imagined. Now, facing her father's medical decisions, she realized she could apply similar principles. "Dad," she said softly, "let's talk about what matters most to you in this journey." Their conversation that afternoon went far beyond medical statistics, touching on his hopes, fears, and what quality of life meant to him. This deeper understanding helped them evaluate the treatment options, not just medically, but holistically. Back at work, Sarah found herself drawing unexpected parallels between her personal and professional challenges. During a crucial meeting about AI ethics, she shared insights from her father's medical journey to illustrate the importance of combining data-driven decisions with human wisdom. "Tech innovation isn't just about efficiency," she told her team. "It's about enhancing human capabilities while preserving what makes us uniquely human." The discussion that followed led to breakthrough ideas about how their AI systems could augment rather than replace human judgment. During her next session with Dr. Miller, as winter rain tapped against the windows, she shared these revelations. "I'm beginning to see that critical thinking isn't just a skill. It's a bridge between different kinds of knowing." Dr. Miller nodded, adding another log to the fire. "Yes, and that understanding becomes particularly powerful when we face decisions that affect both our personal and professional lives." He encouraged her to explore how her dual challenges were actually enriching her leadership. Her experience with her father's healthcare was deepening her sensitivity to how technological changes affected people's lives. Meanwhile, her professional skills in facilitating complex decisions were helping her family navigate medical choices more effectively. This synthesis was tested when her company faced a crisis. A preliminary version of their AI system had made a series of decisions that, while technically correct, had failed to account for important human factors. The incident threatened both their reputation and their relationships with key clients. Sarah called an emergency meeting, but instead of rushing to technical solutions, she guided her team through a more comprehensive exploration. Drawing on her experience with her father's medical decisions, she helped them see how technical accuracy and human wisdom needed to work together. "We're not just fixing a system," she told them. "We're learning how to create technology that serves humanity better." The solution they developed went beyond technical adjustments to include new ways of incorporating human oversight and ethical considerations into their AI development process. The experience became a turning point in how they approached innovation. Sarah established regular wisdom councils where technical experts and human experience specialists could collaborate on ensuring their technological advances enhanced rather than diminished human potential. One evening, as she shared these developments with Dr. Miller, she noticed how his garden, visible through the study window, seemed dormant under its blanket of snow. Yet she knew that beneath the surface, important transformations were taking place. "Sometimes," Dr. Miller observed, following her gaze, "our most significant growth happens during what appears to be a quiet period. The winter of reflection can lead to the spring of new understanding." This insight proved valuable as Sarah continued to balance her various responsibilities. She learned to see the quiet moments, waiting in hospital rooms, reflecting between meetings, sitting in traffic, as opportunities for integrating different aspects of her understanding. Her father's condition gradually stabilized, and their conversations evolved from crisis management to deeper discussions about life, purpose, and legacy. These talks enriched her perspective on leadership, helping her see how personal growth and professional development were interconnected. "You've discovered something profound," Dr. Miller told her during one of their winter sessions. "True wisdom comes not from separating different aspects of our lives, but from finding the harmony between them." As winter deepened, Sarah found herself increasingly comfortable navigating the complexity of her dual roles. She no longer saw her personal and professional challenges as competing demands, but as complementary sources of wisdom. During a board meeting about the company's long-term strategy, she drew on this integrated understanding to articulate a vision for technology development that honored both innovation and human values. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with one board member noting that her approach brought heart and mind together in perfect balance. Later, sharing this success with Dr. Miller, she realized how far she had come from their first meeting. "I used to think critical thinking meant pushing emotions aside," she reflected. "Now I understand it's about bringing all our capacities into harmony." The snow outside was falling harder now, creating a peaceful backdrop for their conversation. Dr. Miller smiled warmly, and that understanding, he said, is the beginning of true wisdom. Chapter 11. Finding Flow. The integration of critical and creative thinking. The early spring light filtered through Sarah's office window, casting a soft glow on the sketches and diagrams that covered her whiteboard. What had started as a routine strategy session had evolved into something more organic, a visual exploration of how different aspects of the company's challenges connected. "I noticed something interesting happening in my thinking," she told Dr. Miller during their next session, now back in his gradually awakening garden. "It's as if analytical and creative thinking aren't separate processes anymore. They're flowing into each other naturally." Dr. Miller smiled, gesturing to a patch of crocuses pushing through the last patches of snow. "Like these flowers," he said, "our thinking processes don't follow rigid categories. True mastery comes when we learn to flow between different modes of thought as naturally as nature shifts between seasons." This insight had begun to manifest in unexpected ways. During a critical meeting about AI implementation, Sarah found herself drawing parallels between the system's neural networks and the way ideas spread through social networks. This metaphorical thinking led to breakthrough insights about how to structure their AI's learning processes. "It's fascinating," she shared with her team, "how often solutions emerge when we allow ourselves to think both systematically and imaginatively." She began encouraging her teams to incorporate creative exercises into their problem-solving sessions, leading to surprising innovations. One particularly memorable breakthrough came during a challenge with their AI ethics framework. Traditional analytical approaches weren't capturing the nuanced human factors they needed to consider. Sarah introduced what she called empathy mapping, combining data analysis with storytelling to understand the full impact of their AI decisions on different stakeholders. "We're not just building systems," she explained to her team. "We're crafting experiences that affect real people's lives. We need both precision and imagination to do this well." During her next visit with her father, now recovering at home, she noticed how this integrated thinking enhanced their conversations. When discussing his rehabilitation plan, she found herself naturally weaving together medical data, personal observations, and creative solutions for making his exercises more engaging. "You've changed," her father remarked one evening. "You still have that sharp mind, but there's a different quality to how you approach problems now. It's like you're seeing patterns I can't see." She shared this observation with Dr. Miller during their next meeting. The garden was coming alive with early spring growth, mirroring the flourishing of ideas in their conversation. "What you're experiencing," he explained, "is the natural evolution of critical thinking. When we develop these skills deeply enough, they begin to transcend the boundaries between different types of thought. Analysis becomes creative, and creativity becomes analytical." This understanding transformed how Sarah approached her role as Chief Innovation Officer. Instead of separating technical and human considerations, she began seeing them as aspects of a single, flowing process. Her team meetings became more dynamic, incorporating both rigorous analysis and creative exploration. One project particularly highlighted this integration. They were developing an AI system to assist in healthcare diagnostics, and the challenge went far beyond technical specifications. It required understanding the delicate interplay between machine learning algorithms and human medical expertise. Think of it like a dance, Sarah suggested to her team. The AI and the healthcare providers each have their steps, but the magic happens in how they move together. This metaphor helped bridge the gap between their technical and human-centered design teams, leading to an approach that enhanced rather than replaced human judgment. During a particularly challenging phase of the project, Sarah found herself drawing on everything she had learned. A technical issue had revealed deeper questions about how their AI system made decisions. The traditional approach would have been to focus purely on the algorithms, but Sarah sensed there was more to explore. She organized what she called a wisdom circle, bringing together developers, healthcare providers, ethicists, and even patients to explore the challenge from multiple perspectives. The discussions moved fluidly between technical analysis and human insight, between data and story, between logic and intuition. "We're not just solving a technical problem," she told the group. "We're exploring what it means to create technology that truly serves human flourishing." The solution that emerged was remarkable, not just for its technical elegance, but for how it integrated different ways of knowing. The AI system learned not only from data, but from the patterns of human expertise, incorporating both measurable outcomes and the subtle wisdom of experienced healthcare providers. Sharing this success with Dr. Miller, Sarah realized how much her understanding of critical thinking had evolved. "It's not just about making better decisions," she reflected. "It's about seeing the connections between things, between logic and creativity, between technology and humanity, between knowledge and wisdom." Dr. Miller nodded, tending to a new growth in his garden. "And that seeing," he said, "that ability to perceive and work with the natural flow of things. That's when critical thinking becomes an art form." As spring progressed, Sarah found this flowing quality appearing in more aspects of her life. Her conversations with her father became richer, weaving together practical concerns and deeper reflections. Her leadership style evolved, becoming more fluid and responsive while maintaining its analytical rigor. During a board presentation about their AI healthcare project, she surprised everyone by starting with a story about her father's hospital experience. But rather than being just an emotional appeal, the story seamlessly integrated with their technical analysis, illustrating how human experience and data could inform each other. "You've created something quite remarkable," one board member commented afterward. "Not just in the technology, but in how you're thinking about innovation itself." Later, in Dr. Miller's garden, now bursting with spring blooms, Sarah reflected on this journey. "I used to think critical thinking was about finding the right answers," she said. "Now I understand it's about learning to dance with complexity." Dr. Miller smiled, watching a butterfly navigate between flowers. "And in that dance," he added, "we find not just solutions, but wisdom." Chapter 12. The Ripple Effect. When individual growth transforms communities. The summer heat shimmered over Seattle's skyline as Sarah stood before an audience at the city's annual Tech and Society Conference. She had been invited to speak about her company's innovative approach to AI development, but the story she wanted to tell went far beyond technical achievements. "Success in technology," she began, "isn't just about what we build, it's about how we think about building it." As she spoke, she caught Dr. Miller's eye in the audience, his presence a reminder of how far this journey had taken her. Earlier that week, during their regular session in his now lush summer garden, they had discussed the broader implications of critical thinking. "You've noticed, haven't you?" he had asked, carefully tending to a flowering vine. "How your growth has created ripples that extend far beyond your individual journey." Indeed, she had. The changes in how she approached problems had sparked transformations throughout her organization and beyond. Teams that once operated in silos now collaborated fluidly. Conflicts that might have once escalated into power struggles became opportunities for collective learning. One particular incident stood out in her mind. During a crucial phase of their healthcare AI project, they had encountered unexpected resistance from a group of senior physicians. Instead of pushing back or retreating, Sarah had drawn on her evolved understanding of critical thinking. Let's explore what wisdom each perspective brings to this challenge. She had suggested, creating a space for both technical expertise and medical experience to be heard. The conversations that followed revealed insights that neither side had initially seen. As she shared this story with the conference audience, she noticed heads nodding in recognition. Critical thinking, she continued, isn't just an individual skill. It's a way of creating environments where collective wisdom can emerge. The impact of this approach had surprised even her. Other departments began adopting similar practices. The company's culture shifted subtly but significantly, becoming more thoughtful, more inclusive, more innovative. Even competitors had taken notice, reaching out to learn more about their approach. During the conference's Q&A session, a young developer asked how to implement these ideas in teams resistant to change. Sarah smiled, remembering her own early frustrations. Start with curiosity, she advised. Not just about technical solutions, but about the human stories behind the resistance. Often, what looks like opposition is actually an invitation to deeper understanding. This wisdom had come from her own experience, particularly in working with her father's medical team. As his condition had stabilized, she had noticed how the most effective healthcare providers combined clinical expertise with deep empathy. This observation had profoundly influenced how she thought about technology development. Back in Dr. Miller's garden the following week, they discussed how personal growth naturally extends to organizational transformation. The garden itself had become a metaphor for this process, each plant contributing to an ecosystem that was more than the sum of its parts. You've discovered something vital, Dr. Miller observed. Critical thinking at its highest level isn't just about individual clarity. It's about fostering environments where collective intelligence can flourish. This understanding was tested when her company faced a significant ethical challenge. Their AI healthcare system had identified a pattern that raised serious privacy concerns. The traditional approach would have been to form a small committee to handle the issue discreetly. Instead, Sarah initiated what she called an ethical inquiry circle, involving stakeholders from across the organization and beyond. The process was messy, uncomfortable at times, but ultimately transformative. We're not just solving a problem, she told the participants. We're creating new ways of thinking about technology, privacy, and human dignity. The solution that emerged was remarkable not just for its technical elegance, but for how it changed their entire approach to AI development. Privacy considerations became woven into their development process from the start, informed by a richer understanding of human needs and values. As summer progressed, Sarah noticed how this ripple effect extended into her personal life. Her conversations with friends and family had gained new depth. Even casual interactions seemed to carry more meaning, as she brought her evolved understanding of critical thinking into everyday situations. One evening, while having dinner with Rachel at her now successful bakery, she realized how their friendship had grown through this journey. Their conversations flowed naturally between personal and professional insights, each enriching the other. You know, Rachel observed, watching your journey has changed how I think about my own challenges. It's like you've shown me a new way of seeing things. During her next session with Dr. Miller, as they sat amid the buzz of summer insects in his garden, Sarah shared these observations. It's amazing, she said, how developing our own critical thinking abilities can create space for others to grow. Dr. Miller nodded, picking up a fallen leaf. Consider this leaf, he said. It's individual, yet part of a larger whole. Our thoughts work the same way, personal yet connected to a broader web of understanding. This insight proved valuable when Sarah was asked to mentor a group of emerging leaders in her company. Instead of just teaching techniques, she focused on helping them discover their own ways of integrating critical and creative thinking. Think of critical thinking like a garden, she told them, borrowing Dr. Miller's metaphor. We each tend our own plot, but the beauty comes from how our individual efforts create a larger landscape of understanding. The impact of this approach became evident during a company-wide innovation challenge. Teams that had once competed now collaborated, building on each other's ideas in ways that created unexpected breakthroughs. "You've created more than just a successful company," a board member commented during their quarterly review. "You've fostered a culture of thoughtful innovation that others want to emulate." As summer began to fade into early autumn, Sarah reflected on this journey with Dr. Miller. His garden was heavy with late summer abundance, a testament to the fertility of patient, thoughtful cultivation. The real power of critical thinking, she realized, isn't just in solving problems. It's in creating environments where better solutions can naturally emerge. Dr. Miller smiled, watching a hummingbird flit between flowers. And in that understanding, he said, "You've discovered the true art of nurturing wisdom, not just in yourself, but in the world around you." Chapter 13. Beyond Boundaries. The Emergence of Collective Wisdom. The autumn colors were at their peak when Sarah received an unexpected invitation. A consortium of technology companies and healthcare providers wanted her to lead a task force on ethical AI implementation in medicine. This wasn't just another project. It represented a chance to influence how an entire industry approached critical thinking and innovation. "Sometimes," Dr. Miller had told her during their latest session, surrounded by the rich oranges and reds of his autumn garden, "our personal growth prepares us for challenges we couldn't have imagined. The question is, how do we scale individual wisdom to address collective challenges?" Sarah pondered this as she prepared for the task force's first meeting. The conference room overlooked Seattle's waterfront, where morning fog was lifting to reveal vessels of all sizes navigating the busy harbor. The scene seemed to mirror the challenge ahead, helping diverse groups find ways to move forward together. "Before we dive into specifics," she began, addressing the assembled group of tech executives, medical professionals, and ethics experts, "I'd like us to explore what brings each of us to this table. What deeper purpose drives our interest in this work?" The question shifted the energy in the room. Instead of jumping into technical discussions or policy debates, people began sharing stories that revealed their personal connections to the challenge. A software engineer spoke about his mother's battle with misdiagnosis. A hospital administrator described watching brilliant doctors struggle with information overload. "What I'm hearing," Sarah observed, "is that this isn't just about building better systems. It's about creating a future where technology and human wisdom enhance each other." The nodding heads around the room confirmed she had touched something important. During her next meeting with Dr. Miller, as they walked through his garden's autumn splendor, she shared her observations about how individual stories could illuminate collective challenges. "Ah," he said, stopping to observe a maple tree in full color. "You're discovering how personal wisdom can inform collective understanding. Just as each leaf contributes to the tree's beauty, each perspective adds to our shared wisdom." This insight proved valuable as the task force faced its first major challenge. They needed to develop guidelines for AI systems that would be used across different hospitals and cultural contexts. The traditional approach would have been to create rigid rules and protocols. Instead, Sarah guided them through what she called wisdom mapping, a process that combined analytical rigor with deep listening to diverse experiences. They collected stories from patients, doctors, nurses, and technologists, looking for patterns that could inform more nuanced guidelines. "We're not just writing rules," she told the group. "We're creating frameworks that can adapt and grow with human experience." The process wasn't always smooth. During one particularly tense session, disagreements erupted between tech optimists who wanted to push boundaries and medical conservatives who prioritized caution. Rather than forcing consensus, Sarah helped them explore the wisdom inherent in both perspectives. "What if," she suggested, "we see these different viewpoints not as obstacles, but as essential parts of a more complete understanding?" This approach led to breakthrough insights about how AI systems could be both innovative and prudent, combining technological advancement with medical wisdom. The guidelines they developed were remarkable, not just for their technical sophistication, but for how they honored different ways of knowing. Meanwhile, Sarah's own organization was evolving in unexpected ways. The principles of collective wisdom she was developing through the task force began influencing how teams collaborated across departments. People started spontaneously forming what they called wisdom circles to address complex challenges. During a crucial project review, She watched in amazement as team members naturally moved between analytical and intuitive thinking, technical and human considerations. The boundaries between different types of expertise had become more permeable, allowing insights to flow more freely. "You've created something remarkable," Dr. Miller observed during their next session. "Not just a learning organization, but a wisdom-generating community." This understanding was tested when the task force faced a crisis. An early implementation of their guidelines had revealed unexpected complications. Some hospital systems were struggling to integrate the new approaches, while others were seeing surprising success. Instead of rushing to revise the guidelines, Sarah guided the group through a deeper exploration. "What can we learn from both the successes and the struggles?" she asked. "How might these challenges be pointing us toward better understanding?" The investigation that followed revealed insights that went far beyond technical issues. They discovered how organizational culture, leadership styles, and human relationships all played crucial roles in how successfully AI systems could be integrated into healthcare settings. "We're not just implementing technology," Sarah realized. "We're facilitating a transformation in how organizations think and learn together." This insight led to a fundamental shift in their approach. Instead of focusing solely on technical guidelines, they began developing what they called wisdom practices, ways of helping organizations cultivate the collective intelligence needed to use AI effectively. One evening, as she shared these developments with Dr. Miller, the setting sun cast long shadows across his garden. Many leaves had fallen now, revealing the essential structure of the trees beneath. "Sometimes," he observed, "we need to let old patterns fall away to see the deeper patterns that support growth." Sarah nodded, understanding. The work she was doing wasn't just about solving specific problems. It was about helping communities develop new ways of thinking together. The impact of this approach began to spread beyond the initial task force. Other industries started reaching out, interested in how these principles might apply to their own challenges. Sarah found herself increasingly invited to speak about not just technical innovation, but about fostering collective wisdom in organizations. "What you're describing," a colleague observed after one such presentation, "isn't just a new way of implementing technology. It's a new way of thinking about how human communities can evolve together." As autumn deepened toward winter, Sarah reflected on how far this journey had taken her from her initial understanding of critical thinking. What had started as an individual quest for clarity had become something much larger, a way of helping communities develop their collective capacity for wisdom. "You know," she told Dr. Miller during their last session of autumn, "I'm beginning to think that the highest form of critical thinking isn't about individual brilliance at all. It's about creating spaces where collective wisdom can emerge." Dr. Miller smiled, gathering the last flowers from his garden before the first frost. "And in that understanding," he said, "you've discovered something profound about how human knowledge grows, not just through individual insight, but through the fertile soil of shared understanding." Chapter 14. Full Circle. The Continuous Journey of Growth. The first snow of winter was falling softly outside Dr. Miller's study window as Sarah shared news that felt both surprising and somehow inevitable. She had been asked to deliver a keynote address at the World Technology Summit, focusing not on technical innovation, but on the human side of technological evolution. "It feels like everything is coming full circle," she said, watching the snowflakes dance in the evening light. "A year ago, I was struggling to get my team to consider new ideas. Now I'm being asked to speak about transforming how entire industries think about innovation." Dr. Miller smiled warmly, pouring them both cups of steaming tea. "Tell me," he said, "how has your understanding of critical thinking evolved since we first met?" Sarah took a thoughtful sip of tea, letting the question settle. "I used to think it was about being smart enough to find the right answers," she began. "Now I understand it's about being wise enough to ask better questions and humble enough to let answers emerge through collective exploration." She thought about the healthcare AI project, which had evolved far beyond its original scope. What started as a technical solution had become a catalyst for transformation in how medical institutions approached decision-making itself. Last week, she shared, "I observed a fascinating interaction between our AI system and a team of doctors. They weren't just using the technology. They were engaging with it in a way that enhanced both human wisdom and machine learning. It was like watching a dance between different kinds of intelligence. Dr. Miller nodded encouragingly. And how has this understanding affected your approach to leadership? I've learned that true leadership isn't about having the answers, Sarah replied. It's about creating spaces where different kinds of wisdom can emerge and interact. Sometimes that means stepping back and letting others find their way, even if we can see a potential solution. She described a recent situation where her team was struggling with a complex ethical challenge. Instead of providing direction, she had helped them develop a framework for exploring the issue together. The solution they ultimately discovered was far richer than anything she could have devised alone. The real breakthrough, she continued, was seeing how personal growth and collective transformation are interconnected. As individuals develop their capacity for critical thinking, it creates ripples that affect entire communities. This understanding had profound implications for her approach to the World Technology Summit. Instead of presenting a polished set of conclusions, she planned to engage the audience in a collaborative exploration of how technology and human wisdom could evolve together. But there's something else, she added, gazing out at the falling snow. I'm beginning to see how this journey never really ends. Each new understanding opens doors to deeper questions. Dr. Miller's eyes twinkled. Now you're touching on something essential. Tell me more about these deeper questions. Sarah leaned forward, her tea forgotten. Well, take our AI healthcare system. The better it gets at integrating with human wisdom, the more complex the questions become. We're not just asking how to make technology more effective. We're exploring what it means to be human in an age of artificial intelligence. She shared how these questions had led to unexpected innovations. Their latest project involved creating what they called wisdom interfaces, ways of interacting with AI that encouraged deeper thinking rather than just faster decisions. The most interesting part, she continued, is how these technologies are helping us understand our own thinking processes better. It's like holding up a mirror to human consciousness itself. Dr. Miller listened intently, occasionally nodding. Outside, the snow continued to fall, creating a sense of peaceful isolation in his study. And how has this affected your personal journey? He asked. Sarah thought about her relationship with her father, now recovering well and engaged in fascinating discussions about the nature of wisdom and technology. She thought about her friendship with Rachel, which had deepened through their shared exploration of different kinds of knowing. The precision of technology and the artistry of baking both requiring their own forms of wisdom. I've learned to see connections everywhere, she replied. Between different ways of thinking, between personal and professional growth, between individual insight and collective understanding. It's all part of a larger pattern. The conversation shifted to her preparations for the summit. Rather than presenting a traditional keynote, she planned to guide participants through an experience that would help them discover these connections for themselves. I want them to understand that critical thinking isn't just a skill to master, she explained. It's a way of being in the world that allows us to navigate complexity with wisdom and grace. As evening deepened, Dr. Miller shared an observation. He said, when you first came to me, you were seeking tools to solve specific problems. Now you're helping others discover how to think in entirely new ways. Sarah nodded, feeling the truth of his words. But I couldn't have gotten here without starting there, she replied. Every step of the journey was necessary, even the struggles and uncertainties. Looking around Dr. Miller's study, at the books lining the walls and the snow falling beyond the windows, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. This journey had taken her far beyond her original goals, leading to a deeper understanding of both herself and the nature of wisdom itself. The beautiful thing, she said finally, is that each ending becomes a new beginning. Every answer leads to more interesting questions. The journey never really ends. It just keeps unfolding in new ways. Dr. Miller smiled, refilling their teacups. And that understanding, he said softly, is perhaps the greatest wisdom of all. Chapter 15. The Eternal Spring, where endings meet beginnings. The early spring sunshine warmed Dr. Miller's garden as Sarah walked through it one last time. After 2 years of regular meetings, this would be their final formal session together. The garden had come full circle, with new growth emerging from winter's rest, much like Sarah's own journey of continuous renewal. "It feels strange," she said, settling into her familiar chair beside the awakening flower beds. "Like I'm graduating, but from what exactly? Every time I think I've reached an endpoint, I discover it's actually a new beginning." Dr. Miller smiled, his eyes twinkling with understanding. "Perhaps that's the deepest lesson of all," he suggested. "True wisdom isn't about reaching a destination. It's about embracing the eternal dance of growth and transformation." The past few months had brought this truth home in unexpected ways. Her keynote at the World Technology Summit had evolved into something none of them had anticipated. Instead of delivering a traditional speech, she had guided the audience through what she called a wisdom journey. Today, she had begun, standing before the gathered technology leaders. "We're not just going to talk about the future of innovation. We're going to experience a new way of thinking about thinking itself." What followed was a carefully orchestrated exploration that combined personal reflection, group dialogue, and interactive experiences. She had drawn on everything she'd learned about integrating different ways of knowing: analytical and intuitive, technical and emotional, individual and collective. The response was extraordinary, she told Dr. Miller now. People who came expecting typical conference content found themselves engaging with questions they'd never considered. Technical experts were discussing philosophy, and business leaders were exploring the nature of wisdom. But it was what happened after the summit that truly demonstrated the ripple effects of their work together. Requests began pouring in from organizations worldwide, not just for technical consultation, but for guidance in transforming how they approached innovation and decision-making. "I've realized," Sarah continued, watching a bee explore early spring blossoms, "that what we've been developing isn't just a method of critical thinking. It's a way of nurturing wisdom in complex systems, whether those systems are individuals, organizations, or entire industries." Dr. Miller nodded, reaching down to clear away some dead leaves, revealing tender new growth beneath. "And how has this understanding changed your view of your role in the world?" Sarah considered the question carefully. Her position as Chief Innovation Officer had evolved far beyond its original scope. She now spent as much time helping organizations develop their capacity for collective wisdom as she did overseeing technical innovations. "I've become a kind of wisdom gardener," she said, smiling at the metaphor. "Instead of trying to solve problems directly, I'm helping create conditions where better solutions can naturally emerge. It's less about having answers and more about nurturing the soil where insight can grow." This approach had led to remarkable developments in their healthcare AI project. The system had evolved into what they called a wisdom augmentation platform, designed not just to provide answers, but to enhance human capacity for insightful decision-making. "The most fascinating thing," she shared, "is watching how different forms of intelligence, human and artificial, individual and collective, can work together to create something greater than the sum of their parts." Her father, now fully recovered, had become an unexpected contributor to this work. His experience as both a patient and a keen observer of human nature brought valuable perspectives to their development process. Their conversations had evolved from practical health matters to deep explorations of what it means to be human in an age of artificial intelligence. "You know," she said, turning to Dr. Miller, "I used to think critical thinking was about becoming smarter than others. Now I understand it's about helping everyone become wiser together." The garden hummed with early spring activity, birds building nests, insects investigating new blooms, life awakening in countless small ways. Dr. Miller watched a butterfly land briefly on a newly opened flower. "And that understanding," he said softly, "is the seed of something profound. How do you see it growing from here?" Sarah shared her vision for what she called wisdom ecosystems, environments where different kinds of knowledge and ways of thinking could flourish together. She had already begun implementing these ideas in her organization, creating spaces where technical innovation and human wisdom could evolve in harmony. "But it's bigger than any one organization," she continued. "I'm seeing possibilities for transforming how we think about education, healthcare, technology, even how we approach the major challenges facing our world." As the afternoon light began to soften, Dr. Miller asked her one final question. And what has been your most valuable lesson from our time together? Sarah looked around the garden, remembering all the conversations they'd had here through changing seasons. She thought about how far she'd come from that frustrated professional seeking simple solutions to complex problems. I've learned that wisdom isn't something we achieve, she said finally. It's something we cultivate in ourselves and in others. And the cultivation never ends. Each season brings new challenges, new opportunities for growth, new ways of understanding. Dr. Miller smiled warmly. Then you understand why this isn't really an ending at all. Sarah nodded, feeling the truth of his words. Their formal sessions might be concluding, but the real work, the ongoing journey of growth and discovery, would continue. Just as his garden would keep cycling through seasons, each bringing its own kind of wisdom, her journey would keep unfolding in new and unexpected ways. Standing to leave, she took one last look around the garden that had become such an important part of her journey. New buds were forming on the branches, promising future blooms. Early spring flowers pushed through the soil, continuing the eternal cycle of renewal. "Thank you," she said simply, knowing that no words could fully express her gratitude. Dr. Miller smiled, his eyes twinkling with familiar warmth. "Remember," he said, "every ending is just another beginning in disguise. The journey of wisdom never truly ends. It just keeps flowering in new ways." As Sarah walked through the garden gate one last time, she felt not sadness but anticipation. Ahead lay new challenges, new opportunities for growth, new ways of helping others discover their own wisdom journeys. The eternal spring of learning and discovery stretched out before her, full of endless possibilities. Epilogue: Seeds of Wisdom. 5 years have passed since Sarah's last formal session in Dr. Miller's garden. On a crisp autumn morning, she finds herself walking up the familiar path to his house, a book tucked under her arm. Her own book, The Art of Flexible Thinking, now translated into 12 languages and inspiring readers worldwide. The garden looks different yet somehow the same, tended now by Dr. Miller's daughter Claire, who has maintained its spirit while adding her own touches. Dr. Miller passed away peacefully last winter, but his wisdom continues to flourish in unexpected ways. Sarah settles onto the old garden bench, remembering countless conversations that shaped her understanding of critical thinking and wisdom. Around her, leaves dance in the autumn breeze, their colors a reminder of life's constant transitions. Her company has evolved into what industry observers call a wisdom-driven organization, known not just for technological innovation, but for pioneering new ways of integrating human and artificial intelligence. The healthcare AI system they developed has transformed medical decision-making in hospitals worldwide, not by replacing human judgment, but by enhancing it in ways they hadn't imagined possible. But perhaps more significantly, the principles she learned from Dr. Miller have spread far beyond their original context. The wisdom ecosystems approach has been adopted by educational institutions, government agencies, and organizations facing complex global challenges. What began as one person's journey to think more clearly has become a movement for transforming how communities approach complex problems. Sarah opens her notebook, much like she used to during her sessions with Dr. Miller. She's here to reflect on the ripple effects of those early lessons as she prepares to launch a global initiative called the Wisdom Project. Its aim is to create spaces worldwide where different forms of knowledge and ways of thinking can come together to address humanity's greatest challenges. Her father, now in his 80s but still sharp as ever, has become an unexpected ambassador for this work, sharing his perspective on how technology and human wisdom can complement each other. Their relationship has deepened into a true partnership of understanding, transcending their former differences. The methodologies she and Dr. Miller developed have evolved into what some call a new paradigm for human development, one that recognizes the interconnection between individual growth and collective transformation. Universities have created programs based on these principles, and a new generation of leaders is emerging with a more integrated understanding of critical thinking and wisdom. As she sits in the garden, Sarah reflects on Dr. Miller's final words to her. Remember, wisdom isn't something we achieve. It's something we nurture into being again and again. She sees now how true this is not just for individuals, but for organizations, communities, and perhaps civilization itself. A young intern from her company joins her in the garden, part of a mentoring program she started in Dr. Miller's honor. The intern is bright, eager, and full of questions, much like Sarah was at the beginning of her journey. As they begin their conversation, Sarah feels Dr. Miller's presence in the gentle wisdom of the garden, in the eternal cycle of growth and renewal, in the continuing journey of discovery that never really ends. The garden continues to flourish, just as the seeds of wisdom Dr. Miller planted continue to grow and spread in ways he might never have imagined. And Sarah, now a wisdom gardener herself, understands that this too is just another beginning, another spring waiting to unfold. As the autumn sun warms the garden, Sarah opens her notebook to a fresh page. There are always new questions to explore, new understandings to discover, new ways of helping wisdom flower in the world. The journey continues, eternal as the seasons, endless as the possibilities for human growth and understanding. And somewhere, she likes to think, Dr. Miller is smiling, watching wisdom bloom in gardens he never planted, in hearts he never met, in a future he helped create but would never see. The eternal spring of human potential, forever unfolding in new and beautiful ways. The true ending is always another beginning, and the art of flexible thinking continues to evolve one mind, one heart, one garden at a time.